Welcome everyone to another episode of Aging in Action. And we're very happy to have with us today Dorothy Mazeau. And Dorothy is with the Golden HomeSharing Connections. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's right.
Hi. And we're going to be talking about a different way of living in the home. We had previously talked about co-housing, and this is a different concept entirely. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, Dorothy, and then maybe dig into what home sharing is all about?
Okay. Well, really, I've been sharing homes with people for most of my adult life. And it's something just that I just, this way of life, I don't really think about it too much. But as a realtor, I was noticing that a lot of my senior clients were having difficulty finding good choices when they wanted to downsize from their home. Retirement homes are quite expensive, and people find that they don't have enough money to move in, or else they've run out of money by the time they're 95 and have to move out again. Finding smaller homes is tough because you're really up against all the first-time buyers who want to get into that same market. So you can't often find that spread between what you have to spend and what you get for your house. And rental accommodations is tough. There's hardly anything. And I think we were just talking about the fact that home inventory is the lowest it's been in 20 years. So it's one thing to sell your home, but you have to find out where you're going to go.
Exactly.
And a lot of people that have said, well, I'd really rather stay in my home, but it's just a lot for me to manage. I'm on my own now, And then I realized that I was living the answer because of the fact that I've been home sharing myself for this many years, for a long time. I raised my son in shared homes. And so that got the idea. Someone first suggested, well, I can start finding people to live with my senior clients. And I thought, well, there's a lot of liability involved there because I don't want to get involved in situations, elder abuse or anything like that. So I thought, well, what about like a dating site? Something where people can go on there and they have a home, they can list their home, and then people that are looking can list themselves. And so that's a way for people to do it. And then I educate them. It's really about education. I have workshops once a month on a golden solution to your housing crunch. That's both for the homeowners and for the people looking for a home.
So it's a similar analogy to a dating site, but you're not. It's not anything to do with that. It's just trying to match. It's a matchmaking system.
Yeah, well, it's compatibility. Compatibility is the key, because no matter how much you might find this wonderful sterling character who was really good credit rating and everything and very honest and reliable, but they might drive you crazy if their lifestyle is too different. So as part of the workshop, and for people who become a member, there's a whole questionnaire, 4-page questionnaire about how do you like to live? And then I also do presentations to community groups, just the whole idea of home sharing, because it's such a new paradigm. And in those, I really cover all the different ways you can do it. I mean, you can buy a home with other people and share a home that way. A homeowner can have people move in with them. You can rent together. And the way I kind of describe it is, if a lot of us started out our adult lives sharing homes when we were in university, or when we first started our careers and didn't have a high income, we had roommates. And then, our careers got launched, we had more income, and then we had families, and so many things happened over the course of our life. And then now we're coming in for landing. This is the other side of it. And honestly, there's safety in numbers. So people who are getting into their senior years, they may be healthy and able-bodied. And I really recommend people do this while they are still energetic, because it does take energy and it takes imagination and flexibility. And then ideally 3 or 4 people sharing a home. People age differently, issues come up, and they're there to help each other. You have each other's back. And it's not that you're providing the home care. You need the professionals for that. But at least there's someone there to dial 911 if there's an emergency, or to advocate for you if something comes up.
Well, for companionship,
building the bond.
For companionship, I'm thinking of my grandmother who lives alone now in this tiny little apartment, and she's just lost her cat, and she's so lonely, and we're all so worried about her because now she lives alone, and I tried calling her every day, but it's not the same, right, as somebody physically being there in her home. So I see a huge advantage to this. Yes, cost wise, of course, but just the companionship and having somebody to talk to.
Honestly, that's almost a bigger piece than the financial piece. They're both there. But even as you say, she's in an apartment building, so it seems to be other people around, but that doesn't mean you're not lonely, because people in apartment buildings are often pretty just behind their door, and that's where they are. I mean, I know that community agencies try to have more programs when it's not COVID time, but that certainly has gone by the board right now. But just having somebody in your home that you can have a cup of coffee with, supposing, you do have community groups. You go out to play bridge or euchre or just for dinners, but just to be able to come home and kick back and have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee and say, you won't believe the day I had. So companionship is huge. It's really a big part of it. And then just help around the house. And in a way,
sorry, I was just going to say, like during COVID, it's become an even greater issue, right? Of loneliness and isolation, and that takes a real toll on somebody's psyche, on their well-being, their mental health.
Truly, truly. I know the United Kingdom actually has a ministry of loneliness. Mm-hmm. And because it is a health hazard, people don't eat right, they get depressed, they don't take proper care of themselves. Mm-hmm. It's something else. Like until 3 years ago, I was sharing a home for 20 years with 2 other women, and we shared a kitchen and we would take turns cooking and so forth. And then for various reasons, that situation ended, and I can certainly talk about that. But it was a mother and daughter, and the mother actually passed away, and that's the whole story. But now I'm living in a home where I have my own kitchen, and we're still sharing. I mean, they're up and down the stairs, and we share the laundry room, and they're picking up eggs for me today, that kind of thing. But it's different when you're cooking a meal for somebody else, not just yourself. I do miss that aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure.
People used to ask me, you're sharing homes with people, what do you do with the kitchen? Well, we cook in it.
I would gladly let somebody else cook.
Yeah, and then sometimes somebody doesn't like to cook; they like to clean.
Yeah.
House, and that, so you don't have to be identical. You just have to have a good mesh.
That's a good point, Gwen. I would make sure I live with somebody that knows what they're doing in the kitchen, because I can't cook for the life of me, and I'd love to have somebody cook me some meals. Not have to be on my application package.
Yeah.
So in a normal sized home, so say you have a 3-bedroom home, then the goal would be to have 3 housemates with.
Well, yeah, or if you have one of the bedrooms, and so a total of 3 people, say 3 or 4. I mean, it can work with 2, but I know I mentioned this where I lived for so many years with a mother and daughter. We first started sharing, and the mother was like 72 years old. The daughter and I had been sharing a home with some other women that we were renting together. And then her mom was going to be buying a house, and she was going to need a mortgage. And she asked her daughter if she'd come with her because she needed somebody else on the mortgage. And she said, well, sure, Mom, I'd come, but can I invite my homemate, see if anybody else would like to join us? Because, we got along really well. Mm-hmm. And we all knew her mom. So several of us said, we'd be happy to do that. And they only could get a house with like 3 bedrooms. So it ended up just being the 3 of us. But to start off with, the mother was really having dinner for us when we come home at night, because I was still practicing architecture then. Her daughter was in healthcare. But her mother did have a health condition that was progressive. So over the next 10 years, she eventually was in a wheelchair, and we did have like 20 hours of personal support workers coming in by the time she passed away. But by then I was in real estate and had a fairly flexible schedule. So yes, we had the professionals come in, but we were friends. And so it's very natural to take somebody to the hairdresser or help them out however you can, and 3 people was good. And then the mother passed away, and we were still together. In fact, she would live there until 2 weeks before she actually passed away. She went into a hospice for the last 2 weeks. But if it hadn't been the 2 of us in the house, if it had just been the daughter looking after her mother, it would have been a huge work, but she's working full time. So we made it work. I would do real estate in the evenings. It really worked. And after the mother passed away, we continued to share a home for another 7 years. But it was a different dynamic. And I think we both felt, okay, it's time for us to move on. She had a boyfriend and so forth. And so I found where I'm living now, which is with a couple who are both in their 80s, both very able-bodied and active. But I find 3 or 4 is a really good balance.
Well, I think it could be a real answer to a big dilemma, like we were talking about, the lack of houses to purchase, even to rent. There's so little on the market, and it's becoming it's becoming out of reach for a lot of people too, to do it on their own. And I have heard about, maybe 2 couples purchasing a house together, but I could really see it as an answer for a lot of people. And I think there's a fear, though, that you're letting this stranger into your house. But I keep hearing all these groups of women that are friends, and they all want to live together when the husbands are gone. And I think that could work too.
And honestly, they're only strangers when you first meet them, but you don't
Right.
just rush into it. You do take time to get to know each other. And again, that's how I compare it to a dating site, because you wouldn't marry somebody after the first date. You know, you get to
Well,
know
some
them.
do. But
Oh, honestly, I do get calls from people that say, I really need to find a place within a month. And I say, well, I'm sorry, it's not like that. It takes time
Yeah.
and due diligence and get to
But
know each other.
you made a good point before in comparison where you said, when you're going off to college or university, it's just the norm to
Yeah.
move
you
in
make
with
it work.
strangers and other students that are studying, and that's just normal and classic, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what about thinking about that as we age? So I thought that was a really interesting comparison that kind of,
Yeah, the one difference I think is the fact that when you're a student, it's just short term.
Yeah.
You're just going to do this,
Yeah.
and you can put up with a lot short term.
well, yeah.
Whereas at this stage of life, people are looking for a longer relationship that they can stay there as long as they're physically able to stay. And and you'd want to have an agreement, like a written agreement, which you'd review with a lawyer. What happens if somebody gets sick and can't remain in the home? And make sure you're not doing this in isolation. If people have family, the family has to know. And it's a community effort. You're not just by yourselves, but and you look after each other as much as you can, and not, again, you don't become caregiver, but
Right.
you just you have your eyes on the scene of somebody. I've heard of people where a woman's mother's living alone and her daughter calls her once a day, every day. And then one day after the phone call, her mother had a stroke. And nobody knew about it until 24 hours later when her daughter tried to reach her again. So if there was someone in the home, obviously they could have responded right away.
So
Yeah, that makes so
like,
much
so the difference between co-housing and co-sharing, like co-housing, they're actually maybe building a house or like I still struggle kind of to see, because I have heard about co-housing as a group of people living together in one house sort of situation, but is that actually maybe more home sharing as opposed to co-housing? There seems to be a lot of gray areas there.
Yeah, there is overlap, but I know some organizations which are building homes to share, they do it like almost a small condominium model, where there are 4-bed sitting rooms sharing a kitchen and common spaces, that they call that co-housing. But to me, that's not co-housing. Co-living is another word people use. I think that the technology or the terminology is evolving, perhaps. But yeah, with co-housing, unlike the apartment building where you're living in isolation in your unit and you don't know your neighbors, co-housing communities, as I'm sure your person who you had on talked about, you're building community at the same time as you're developing the physical community, the social community, so that yes, you may have your own unit, but it really encourages using the common facilities, the common kitchen, and people have eyes on the street and they're aware of each other and know if there's a stranger in the neighborhood. Yeah, so it's a really an intentionally tight-knit community that really encourages interaction, even though you have your own private home.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting thought to think about that. And as you get progressively older and trying to, because fixed income's just living on your Canada pension or your old age pension, it's not going to cut it if you don't.
It's tough. It's tough.
Very.
The average income of a single senior, it was a few years ago, but it hasn't changed much. I think it was $26,000 a year. It's a little over $2,000 a month. And you can't find, they say you shouldn't spend more than really 30% of your income on housing. But what can you get for $750 a month?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
No. So
No, I think bachelor apartments in our area are more than that.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, renting a room is often $700-800 now.
Yeah.
It's got to that point where that used to be a 2-bedroom apartment, but and that's so difficult. If you're relying on maybe you own your own home, but maybe all your source for everything else is your 2 pensions from the government.
Yeah. And that's where renting a room, like a rooming house or a boarding house where you just have your room, is totally different from having a room in a house that you're sharing as almost a family, an intentional family, a family of friends.
Yeah. No, I think it's something that could work for a lot of people. It's not going to be for everybody, because some people don't like sharing. They haven't liked sharing since they were kids in a sandbox.
We need a lot of solutions, but it's a good one. And I know even think about the sustainability aspect of it. And in Ontario, I think there's something like 5 million spare bedrooms in Ontario. And that's equal to 24 years worth of affordable housing construction.
Yeah.
So even from an environmental standpoint, and the financial for the government to build that much housing. So find people that you like. It's not a question of piling people into your home, but it's just find people that you like.
Yeah.
Build a team of people that you can share a home with.
Yeah. And that's what you help guide them through that process of how do you all of a sudden, and because the expression good paper makes good friends, to have everything itemized as much as you can, so you can't, foresee everything, but to have some idea who's responsible for what. And so it's not all falling on one person either.
Well, I have a home sharing agreement, which is almost like the Constitution, if you will, and then you can still have household rules that are the bylaws, and those can change and evolve depending on the situation. But you just talk about it and decide.
Okay.
It's always important.
You had mentioned the legal part, right? Which always goes through my mind as well. And you walk them through resources and what to do to get a legal agreement in place, right? To make sure everybody's safe on all parties.
Yes. Yeah. I have a checklist on the website. That's what you need to include. And I'm happy to work with people if they wish me to draft an agreement, but then I insist they take it to a lawyer because I'm not a lawyer. And they want to dot the T's and cross the I's and make sure that it's going to work for everybody. But, another thing to be aware of is that if you are sharing a home with someone, or you're sharing your home, and you're sharing either a kitchen or a bathroom with the homeowner, then you're not covered by the residential tenancies agreement. So, so that's where it's really important to have an agreement, a written agreement. It's contract law in that case, because there's no special laws covering this kind of arrangement.
Which is another thing that a lot of people would be concerned about, because there have been horror stories with tenants and you can't get them out of your house.
Yes.
It is a very restrictive way of dealing with a tenant, for sure. So this is a whole different thing.
Yes, absolutely. And you want to do the background check, background checks and credit checks. And honestly, they can ask the homeowner for a background check too, because they don't know how many bodies you may have buried in the basement.
Oh, geez.
All the ex-husbands.
Another episode.
Right.
My goodness. Yeah, that was my only thought process, was the legal paperwork and things that come into play, right? Because that would be the first thing that shoots in my mind, where I think this is a really great concept and idea, but people want to make sure they're protected and they understand what they're walking into or agreeing to. And I think you touched on that, where you had mentioned, do it now while you are cognitively able to and you are active, and don't wait till you're at a point where you're not, right? Start that process now if this is something that might interest you, and you will support them and walk them through all the steps so they know they're doing it as safe as possible and staying organized, right? Because I would know the first thing on where to start. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers might be thinking the same thing. This is a cool concept, but where do I start? How do I get involved? Where do I go? And you also mentioned webinar sessions. Can you touch on those a little bit more?
I'm doing those once a month, and they're currently on the second Saturday of every month, starting around 12:30 in the afternoon. And depending how many people are there, it can be between an hour and a half to 3 hours. It's great when there are a number of people, because then you can have more discussion. But we go through all the things, the compatibility survey, and then how do you find people? One way is through my website, but also you can go on Kijiji or Craigslist and ask word of mouth. I mean, I found where I'm living now by word of mouth, just asking people that I knew. So there's a lot of ways to find people, but once you found them, what do you do? And that's where knowing how to do an agreement and doing the compatibility check and so forth is a really important piece.
So when it comes to, let's look on the homeowner side of the coin here. So you're taking an older couple, we'll say, and they own a home, and it's, I'm assuming, paid for and all that stuff. So is there like a chart as to like cost wise? You know what I mean? It has to be a better price than an apartment, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So what do you have? Is there like a price point that?
There's not really. It depends. I think a homeowner needs to look at what their costs are, and they have to say if they need to have a certain amount of income to keep the house, they might need to have a couple of people move in. And if you're someone coming in, again, ideally you wouldn't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. So those are the rule of thumb. And I do advise homeowners, don't expect you're going to get market rent, because the whole reason people are moving in is because they can't afford market rent.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah. So, $700-800, even up to $1,000, depending on the situation. you know, and what you're, like in my case, I needed to have office space as well, which was fine because I'm living in a ranch style bungalow. So there's lots of space. I have almost the whole downstairs to myself, although I'm sharing this room I'm in now. There's a pool table just over to my right that, you know, sometimes I go and have my dinner somewhere else because I can play pool here, you know,
Yeah.
that kind
Is
of
it a
thing.
ranch?
Sorry?
Did you say a ranch?
Ranch style bungalow, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's way more space than I had when I was
Yeah.
sharing the home with the mother and daughter, because that was a bungalow loft. And so her daughter and I had the rooms upstairs and she had the main room. And that was a newer home. We had a great room. And there was fortunately one room towards at the front of the house that we closed off because I was working at home at a certain point. And sometimes her daughter would be working at home for whatever reason. But if we had to make a private phone call, we would just go into the other room and close the door. Now we did theoretically have office space in the basement, but it wasn't a finished basement, so it wasn't that pleasant. So often I'd be at one end of the dining room table and she was at the other end with our laptops.
Well, and the older you get, you realize, I mean, essentially, I live in a duplex. So, you know, we own the duplex, but I'm living in about 1,000 square feet, plus my office is separate. But you realize as you don't need all the great big house that you might have had at one time and
No.
fill it full of stuff. And it's much better to kind of try to, you know, put that to reduce all that stuff. And what do we need it for, right?
Yeah, and to do that, my goodness, I advise you, please do the downsizing exercise now before you think you have to move. Because I know so many people whose parents passed away and they were left with a house full of stuff to deal with. And that's just not fair to the kids.
Yeah. Downsizing is key throughout your life. Even I think of all the stuff I have that I'm always organizing and decluttering because I like to collect stuff. My husband's a hoarder, I swear. He likes to collect stuff too. So it's important to always be downsizing.
That's amazing. Anytime you stay in one place for very long, you start accumulating stuff.
Yep. Stuff you really don't need. Realize what have you used in the last 6 months, right?
Mhm.
I'm keeping an eye on time here. And as we're closing to this episode, we want to give you an opportunity to maybe touch on any final thoughts, any other information you'd like to share with our viewers.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, the workshops I do once a month. I'd be happy to hear from people who would like to do that. And that's something that I include if someone becomes a member and they post their profile on my site, that I include the cost of the workshop for free. But ordinarily it's $50 a person for the workshop. Membership is $60 for 6 months or $90 for a year as either a homeowner or a home sharer. And I also am happy to do presentations to community groups. I've done them for university women's clubs and provost clubs and church groups, community centers and senior centers. So I'd love to do that kind of thing. And if people would like to get in touch with me, they're welcome to get in touch by my email, which is hello@goldengirlscanada.ca. And the website, the easiest way to remember it is goldengirlscanada.ca, also Golden HomeSharing Connections. But Golden Rules Canada, they remember that, they can find me.
Oh, great. And I'm sure we can share whatever information we can on our social media platforms to encourage people to go to your website, register for a webinar if it's something that interests them to learn more. And we want to thank you for joining us today, Dorothy, and sharing this great concept, offering some tips and suggestions, because you are helping us and our viewers age in action.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Thanks so much, Dorothy.